Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone at dinner. They smile often, say the right things, and hold unwavering eye contact. But something deep within you clenches, a strange discomfort, an invisible warning. You don't know why, but your instincts whisper, something is wrong here. You leave the table unsure of what just happened, yet somehow a piece of your confidence didn't leave with you. Now imagine this scenario repeats itself again and again. Different people, different situations, same strange erosion of your soul. You begin to wonder, is it them or is it me? What if I told you this? There are people who don't need weapons to destroy you. They don't even need to raise their voice. Their tool is far more subtle. Psychic, psychological, invisible to the eye but deadly to the spirit. And they walk among us every day. Sometimes, even inside our own families. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and mystic of the psyche, believed that certain types of people aren't just problematic, they're dangerous, not because they're obviously violent, but because they distort reality around them. They hijack your perception, infiltrate your values, and gradually deform your identity. These people don't appear in horror films. They appear in relationships, workplaces, schools, even in leadership. Here's the terrifying paradox. The most dangerous people aren't those who hate you. They're often the ones who claim to love you. They don't burn bridges. They build false ones, so you walk toward connection only to fall into isolation. But how can we recognize them? How do you protect your psyche from the psychological shadows they carry? This is not about villainizing others. It's about liberating yourself from unconscious entanglements, about seeing, with crystal clarity, what your unconscious has been begging you to notice all along. We live in a culture obsessed with empathy, tolerance, and understanding. But what if, just what if, some people shouldn't be understood? What if the very act of trying to heal or fix them is how they get inside you in the first place? Here's the deeper question. Do you really know who you're letting into your mind? Jung warned us not merely about trauma, but about possession, how certain personalities can possess others by unconsciously projecting their shadow. And if you don't know who they are, it might already be too late. These 6 archetypes of dangerous people don't appear with warning signs. They often masquerade as friends, lovers, mentors, even healers. They charm, they soothe, they explain away your instincts, and by the time you notice the cost, you've already paid with your peace of mind. And here lies the existential trap. The more sensitive, kind, or introspective you are, the more vulnerable you become. Because you believe everyone deserves compassion, but not everyone deserves access. Why do we open the door even when something inside screams not to? Why do we ignore the unease in our gut, the dreams that turn dark, the emotions that seem to twist when they're near? It's because we were never taught what danger feels like. We were only taught what it looks like, and so we mistake charm for safety, intelligence for integrity, passion for love, spirituality for truth. But Jung knew something modern society still hasn't learned. The shadow wears many disguises, and the people who haven't faced their own darkness, they leak it onto others. You're not paranoid. You're not broken. You're waking up. So now we must face a critical challenge, not how to fix these people, but how to recognize them before they undo you. Are you ready to meet them? In the next section, we'll name them one by one, each more subtle than the last, each more hauntingly familiar. And once you see them, you'll never unsee them. Let's begin. Number 1, the eternal victim. They're always suffering, always misunderstood, always under attack. To them, the world is a hostile place, and they are its permanent casualty. They recount past traumas like sacred scripture, stories retold, reshaped and weaponized. And if you listen too long, you'll start to carry their wounds as your own. Carl Jung would say, this person is possessed by their wounded child archetype, Instead of integrating their pain, they let it define their identity. And the danger, if you try to help them, they will unconsciously make you their oppressor. Because their survival depends on staying the victim. They'll reject solutions, sabotage support, and reinterpret kindness as control. And every time you defend yourself, they'll accuse you of cruelty. You leave the conversation drained, confused, maybe even apologizing. But ask yourself, why do I always feel guilty around them, even when I've done nothing wrong? It's because they need your guilt to keep their narrative alive. And slowly your reality bends to theirs, until you start believing the same lies they do. Number 2, the passive manipulator. They never tell you what they want. They just make you feel bad for not giving it. They use sighs instead of words, silence instead of confrontation, guilt instead of honesty. On the surface, they seem harmless, maybe even shy or sweet, but look closer. There's a cold, quiet strategy beneath it all. Jung might say, this person has repressed their own assertiveness so deeply, it now emerges through manipulation. They've buried their aggression beneath layers of martyrdom, and now they control through emotional discomfort rather than force. When you ask them what's wrong, they say nothing. When you ask them to be direct, they say you're overthinking. But your body feels the pressure. Your energy changes when they enter the room. You feel responsible for their mood, even though they've said nothing. This is not communication. It's psychological warfare wrapped in softness, and over time it erodes your confidence, your clarity, your truth. You begin censoring yourself just to keep their mood in check. Number 3, the charmer with no core. They know exactly what to say. Their words are like silk, their presence intoxicating. They reflect your values, share your interests, and seem to understand you on a soul-deep level. But give it time and the illusion cracks. This person has no real self. They mirror others to gain approval, affection, or status. They've mastered the art of becoming who you want them to be. And that's what makes them so dangerous. To Jung, this is a fragmented persona detached from the self. There's no authentic center, only performance. They say what you want to hear, not because it's true, but because it's effective. And when their mask slips, you see something terrifying. Behind all that charm is emptiness. They don't feel guilt. They don't reflect. They simply move on to the next person who'll believe the illusion. By the time you realize it, you've invested emotionally, spiritually, maybe even financially, and they were never really there. Number 4. The unconscious shadow projector. This one is more subtle but more insidious. They're always pointing out what's wrong with others, hypocrites, narcissists, liars, manipulators, and yet something feels off. Their accusations are so passionate, so frequent, so extreme. Eventually you realize they're describing themselves. Jung believed we all have a shadow, the dark side of our psyche we try to deny or suppress. But if someone never does the inner work, that shadow doesn't go away. It projects onto others like a movie screen. So the things they most hate in others are the things they refuse to see in themselves. They accuse you of what they're doing. They moralize, but only to hide their own corruption. They blame, but never self-reflect. These people can make you feel crazy because you're defending yourself from attacks that don't make sense. You know you didn't do what they say, but their certainty is so intense, you start questioning your own sanity. You're not crazy, you're just being projected on. Number 5. The ideological fanatic. They could be religious, political, spiritual, scientific, doesn't matter. What matters is this: their ideology is their identity. They don't think, they believe. There is no debate, no curiosity, no openness. They've wrapped their sense of self so tightly around a belief system that to question it is to attack them, and they will retaliate. Jung warned that when a person fuses their ego with a collective idea, they become possessed by a mass mind. They're no longer an individual. They are a mouthpiece for a doctrine, and that doctrine demands obedience, not understanding. These people will judge you not by your heart or actions, but by your alignment. If you stray from their orthodoxy even slightly, you're exiled. And the worst part? They often disguise their control as truth. They'll tell you they're just trying to awaken you. But it's not awakening, it's indoctrination. The moment you stop agreeing, you're labeled blind, evil, or lost. And suddenly, all the love they showed you becomes withdrawal, condemnation, or silence. Number 6, the smiling predator. They look harmless, maybe even kind, but something about their gaze lingers. They study you, find your soft spots, mirror your dreams, and then they begin to twist. Subtly at first, maybe a small insult disguised as humor, a contradiction hidden in a compliment. A rule they break just once, but the pattern grows. They test boundaries. They deny what happened. They charm you again. And slowly, they make you doubt your own eyes. These people are the true emotional predators. They don't just manipulate, they condition. And Jung would say they operate from a place of unconscious power lust. They've fused with their shadow and now weaponize it. They don't want connection. They want control. And by the time you realize it, you've already betrayed your instincts 100 times each time, hoping this version of them will be different. But they never change. Only the mask does. Each of these 6 types operates differently. But they all have one thing in common. They distort your reality, and if you don't learn to name them, you'll end up defending them while losing pieces of yourself in the process. But why do these people exist? Why does the psyche create such dangerous personas? And why do we keep attracting them into our lives? That's what we'll uncover in the next section. You've seen them now. 6 human shadows walking in plain sight. Victims who weaponize their pain, charmers who have no self, ideologues who replace thought with belief. And still a more haunting question remains. Why do they exist at all? Why does the human psyche generate such dangerous archetypes? And perhaps more importantly, why are we drawn to them? Let's begin not with an answer, but with a wound. Somewhere deep in the structure of society, something went wrong. A fracture occurred between the self and the soul, between outer performance and inner integrity. The world began to reward personas, not people, image, not essence, adaptation, not authenticity. And so in a world that demands survival over sincerity, these dangerous types are not anomalies, they are products. Carl Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." These 6 people you met earlier, they are master escape artists, not of prisons but of pain. They've learned to avoid their shadow by projecting it onto others. They've learned to gain power through empathy, guilt, ideology, or charm, because facing their truth would mean collapsing the entire identity they've spent a lifetime building. They are in many ways sick with avoidance, and we, those who encounter them, suffer under them, even love them, are not innocent either. Because if we're honest, part of us is drawn to them for a reason. Nietzsche once said, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process, he does not become a monster." So let's ask ourselves, why do we fight these monsters over and over? Why do we keep trying to save, fix, or understand them? Because deep down we think if we can rescue them, we might finally redeem ourselves. We attract these archetypes, not out of bad luck, but out of unconscious programming, childhood conditioning, existential loneliness, a craving to resolve unfinished emotional business from our earliest relationships. Maybe the eternal victim reminds you of a parent who never gave you approval. Maybe the charmer with no core mirrors, your own fear of being seen for who you really are. Maybe the ideological fanatic represents the control you once suffered under and unconsciously replicate in your desire to wake people up. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." These people are not just characters in our lives. They are mirrors of our inner world. But here's where the trap deepens. Modern culture teaches us to be endlessly open, tolerant, understanding. And while compassion is sacred, unboundaried compassion is a poison. The kind that keeps you tethered to the very forces destroying your sense of self. This is why Jung spoke so forcefully about individuation, the journey of becoming whole, not by avoiding the shadow but by integrating it. And here lies the paradox. To protect yourself from dangerous people, you must first confront the danger within. Because we all carry seeds of these 6 types. Yes, even you, even me. Have you ever sought attention through your suffering? Have you ever said what someone wanted to hear just to be accepted? Have you ever avoided confrontation only to punish with silence? Of course you have. We all have. These archetypes are dangerous, not just because they exist out there, but because they live in here. So the real danger isn't just them. It's not recognizing when we become them. It's when the charmer becomes our mask in job interviews. It's when the victim becomes our shield in relationships. It's when the fanatic becomes our identity in moments of fear. And the more unconscious we remain, the more we attract their mirror in the outside world. Because like Arthur Schopenhauer, a philosopher of bleak clarity, said, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." Translation, we don't choose our patterns, not until we see them, not until we trace them to their source, the forgotten memories, unmet needs and buried traumas of childhood. This is the hidden root. These dangerous people are symptoms of deeper fractures within families, within society, within the self. They exist because we are taught to perform, not to feel, to succeed, not to be whole, to adapt, not to heal. And those who can't conform completely, they distort, they fragment, they find other ways to survive. So the next time you encounter someone whose presence drains your soul, remember this. They are not just a threat, they are also a lesson, a mirror, an invitation to awaken the unconscious. And this awakening begins with boundaries, with discernment, with the courage to say no more. No more sacrificing your peace for someone else's unhealed wounds. No more confusing manipulation for love. No more making yourself smaller to fit someone else's comfort. Because until you do, the cycle continues. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Hell is other people." But Jung would disagree. He'd say, hell is what we refuse to see within ourselves until it appears in other people. So now that we've unearthed the roots, one final question remains. What happens when we let these people into our lives unchecked? What do they do to your dreams, your goals, your soul? In the next part, we'll reveal the unseen consequences, how these people quietly rewire your identity, shape your relationships, and steal years from your life without you even realizing it. This is why Jung spoke so forcefully about individuation, the journey of becoming whole, not by avoiding the shadow but by integrating it. And here lies the paradox. To protect yourself from dangerous people, you must first confront the danger within. Because we all carry seeds of these 6 types. Yes, even you, even me. Have you ever sought attention through your suffering? Have you ever said what someone wanted to hear just to be accepted? Have you ever avoided confrontation only to punish with silence? Of course you have. We all have. These archetypes are dangerous, not just because they exist out there, but because they live in here. So the real danger isn't just them. It's not recognizing when we become them. It's when the charmer becomes our mask in job interviews. It's when the victim becomes our shield in relationships. It's when the fanatic becomes our identity in moments of fear. And the more unconscious we remain, the more we attract their mirror in the outside world. Because like calls to Arthur Schopenhauer, a philosopher of bleak clarity, said, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." Translation, we don't choose our patterns, not until we see them, not until we trace them to their source, the forgotten memories, unmet needs and buried traumas of childhood. This is the hidden root. These dangerous people are symptoms of deeper fractures within families, within society, within the self. They exist because we are taught to perform, not to feel, to succeed, not to be whole, to adapt, not to heal. And those who can't conform completely, they distort, they fragment, they find other ways to survive. So the next time you encounter someone whose presence drains your soul, remember this: they are not just a threat, they are also a lesson, a mirror, an invitation to awaken the unconscious. And this awakening begins with boundaries, with discernment, with the courage to say no more. No more sacrificing your peace for someone else's unhealed wounds. No more confusing manipulation for love. No more making yourself smaller to fit someone else's comfort. Because until you do, the cycle continues. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Hell is other people." But Jung would disagree. He'd say, hell is what we refuse to see within ourselves until it appears in other people. So now that we've unearthed the roots, one final question remains. What happens when we let these people into our lives unchecked? What do they do to your dreams, your goals, your soul? In the next part, we'll reveal the unseen consequences, how these people quietly rewire your identity, shape your relationships, and steal years from your life without you even realizing it. You think it's just an argument, a disagreement, a phase, but something deeper is unraveling. Not all at once, but slowly, like a thread tugged quietly at the hem of your soul. That's how it starts when you let these dangerous people stay. You think you're just helping a victim, giving a charmer a chance, tolerating a fanatic out of politeness. You tell yourself you're being kind, mature, spiritual. But one day you wake up and realize you no longer recognize yourself. This is the cost Jung tried to warn us about, not with fear, but with urgency. These personalities don't destroy you in one grand betrayal. They erode you in 1,000 micro-compromises. In every silence you keep, every instinct you override, every version of yourself you bury to keep the peace. And the consequences, they're not always visible until it's too late. 1. You lose your internal compass. The passive manipulator makes you question your perceptions. They deny, deflect, and distort until you start thinking, maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe you really are the problem. Gaslighting doesn't need to be loud or cruel. It just needs to be persistent, subtle, gentle enough that you begin editing yourself before they even say a word. And soon, you lose your ability to tell whether your feelings are real. You begin looking outside for confirmation of what's happening inside. That's the first sign of identity erosion. When your reality becomes dependent on someone else's validation. 2, you develop self-betrayal as a survival skill. The smiling predator knows how to twist the knife while making you feel like you deserved it. They violate a boundary, then flatter you into silence. You feel violated, but you smile. You feel anxious, but you explain it away. Every time you suppress your instincts to protect the relationship, you send a message to your unconscious mind. My safety doesn't matter. My truth isn't valid. This pain must be love. This is how trauma bonding begins. Not in chaos, but in confusion. Not in abuse, but in ambiguity. 3. You normalize dysfunction. The more time you spend with an eternal victim, the more you start to absorb their worldview, that life is unfair, that everyone is selfish, that hope is foolish. And because you've spent so long comforting them, your mind slowly adjusts to their reality. You adopt their emotional climate as your own. Their hopelessness becomes your baseline. Their helplessness becomes your lens. And before you know it, joy feels suspicious. Success feels wrong. You start expecting life to be heavy, for your dreams begin to decay. Jung once warned that the psyche will not tolerate betrayal forever. When you suppress your truth long enough, it rebels, not always loudly but destructively. Your passion dries up, your vision blurs. Your ability to imagine a better future collapses under the weight of psychological fatigue. You may not even notice the moment your dreams begin to rot. You just get tired. You start saying, "I don't know what I want anymore." You call it burnout, depression, a rough patch. But underneath all of it is this: you've been surviving someone else's emotional war and calling it love. 5. Your nervous system gets hijacked. Prolonged exposure to manipulative or unstable personalities changes the brain. Your amygdala, the part that processes fear, becomes hyperactive. Your cortisol levels rise. Your body lives in a state of constant anticipation, waiting for the next emotional landmine. You may become hypervigilant, jumpy, anxious, or numb, disconnected, exhausted without reason. This is not weakness, it's neurological conditioning. Relationships are supposed to regulate our nervous system, but these people dysregulate it, and the longer you stay, the more your body forgets what safety feels like. 6. You begin to replicate the very traits you hate. Here's the most haunting truth: we become what we don't heal. If you're not conscious, you may find yourself picking up the same patterns you swore you'd never tolerate. You start playing the victim to get sympathy. You start avoiding conflict through silence. You start using charm to cover your insecurity. Because pain that isn't processed gets passed on, not always to others, sometimes to yourself. 7. You miss the life you were meant to live. All of this leads to the most tragic consequence. You lose time. Years, sometimes decades, not in catastrophe but in quiet soul death. You stay too long in relationships you outgrew. You abandon the path you were meant to walk. You suppress the gifts you were born to give. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But these people will keep you from that privilege, not through chains but through confusion, not with force, but with subtle psychological gravity that pulls you back into who you used to be. And still you stay, because the cost of leaving feels unbearable. But here's the final truth: the cost of staying is yourself, and the world doesn't need another person twisted into a version they weren't meant to be. The world needs you, the real you, the one that gets buried beneath layers of shame, fear, guilt, and loyalty to people who never deserved your trust. So you must ask yourself, how much longer will you pay the price for someone else's wounds? How much longer will you betray yourself in the name of understanding? You're not crazy for feeling something is wrong. You're not selfish for protecting your soul. You're not cruel for choosing distance over dysfunction. You're awakening, and now we stand at the edge of a deeper realization, one that breaks the cycle entirely. What is the final truth that dissolves the spell of these dangerous people? What insight makes you immune, not just to them, but to the need for them? That revelation awaits in the final chapter. You're standing in the wreckage now. The echoes of conversations that made no sense. The broken pieces of boundaries you thought you had. The distant memory of a self you barely remember. But here's the thing about wreckage. It reveals the foundation beneath. And what's been hiding there, what's always been there, is not weakness. It's truth. The final realization, the one Carl Jung pointed to in all his work, is this. The danger was never really them. The danger was your disconnection from your own center. Yes, they deceived you. Yes, they drained you. But the only reason they had power was because you gave them access to places in yourself you hadn't yet occupied. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Every dangerous person you attracted was mirroring a part of you that was unconscious, unclaimed, not because you're broken, but because no one ever taught you how to guard the gates of your psyche, how to know your own worth so deeply you don't entertain false versions of love, how to face your own shadow so fiercely you become immune to others who haven't. The final and most powerful truth is this: you don't overcome them by fighting them. You overcome them by becoming whole. Let that sink in. The victim can only invade your life if you haven't faced your own unhealed wounds. The charmer only seduces you when you doubt your own inner compass. The fanatic only dominates you when you haven't claimed your own sovereignty. These people are not just enemies. They are invitations. Every dangerous person you've met was your unconscious asking to be met, to be seen, to be healed, to be integrated. You were never meant to spend your life avoiding toxic people. You were meant to become so deeply rooted in yourself that you repel anything misaligned. That is individuation. That is freedom. And that is the point of all of this. Because beneath the pain, beneath the confusion, beneath the spiritual exhaustion, something deeper has been forming inside you. A self that no longer negotiates its light just to stay connected. A self that can sit with its shadow and say, "You don't scare me anymore." A self that refuses to be seduced by chaos, masquerading as love. This is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. Because when you are clear, the fog of manipulation can't touch you. When you are whole, you stop attracting fragments. When you know your worth, you stop justifying your pain. And here lies the paradox Jung would want you to understand. The only way to protect yourself from darkness is to no longer fear your own. You've spent your life trying to be good, kind, acceptable, understanding. But in doing so, you buried your instincts, your anger, your clarity. You forgot that your wholeness, not your politeness, is what makes you powerful. So this is your rebirth, not as someone harder, but as someone honest. Not as someone who avoids the dark, but as someone who walks through it unshaken. Because once you've seen what manipulation feels like in the body, you never forget. Once you've heard the sound of your soul being stepped on, you never ignore it again. You begin to walk differently, speak differently. You set boundaries not to punish, but to protect the sacred. You love differently, not out of need, but from overflow. And most of all, you stop apologizing for the light that others once tried to dim. This is the work. This is the way forward. This is the revolution. Not in changing the world, but in no longer letting it change you. You are not here to save dangerous people. You are here to save yourself. And in doing so, become a living example of what self-possession looks like in a fractured world. So if any part of you has doubted, dimmed, or disappeared in the presence of these archetypes, let that version of you die here, and let something truer rise in its place. Not because you've conquered others, but because you finally return to yourself. And in that place, in that still sovereign place, you are untouchable. If this journey moved you, grounded you, or helped you see something you couldn't before, then stay with it. Because the work of becoming whole doesn't end here. Subscribe, not just to this channel, but to your own growth, to the painful, powerful, liberating truth of your psyche, to the kind of healing that changes your frequency, not just your thoughts. You've seen the dangerous people. You've understood the patterns. You've walked through the fire. Now become the light that never burns itself out, and let them learn from your absence what your presence used to protect.